Hey everyone, welcome to Beansville Land. Wait, that wasn't a shotgun. Video game consoles are great in so many ways, man. As a collector, some of my favorite things to buy are consoles. You can tell because every time I get mugged, that's all I carry on me.
All I have are Game Boys.
Consoles can be great for many reasons, like the controllers. The SNES's concave and convex buttons, the GameCube's analog triggers, and the... However, a big part of buying games for a new console is putting them on the shelf. One of the most satisfying things you could dream of. Growing a collection of games can be really fun, but how it looks on the shelf can vary console to console. Which is what I want to dive deep into today, the journey from cartridges to discs, and back to cartridges. Let's start with the first generation of consoles, the lame one, all the way back to 1972, with the release of the Magnavox Odyssey, the first home console video game system. Most systems, until around the 90s, used cartridges, which is what the Magnavox Odyssey used. However, instead of being ROM cartridges, they essentially plugged in and modified the console's internal circuitry to play games. The carts themselves looked like this. Numbers fans, this is your time to shine. Yeah, not much of a looker, but I take them with a grain of salt. It literally was the first attempt at doing this. Having no labels is passable due to the slim amount of games even being released on this thing, which was 28, but at least we have a start. From what I can tell, there were no other consoles in the first generation that used interchangeable cartridges, so it's on to the second. In 1976 and in 1977 in Japan, the Fairchild Channel F released the first home console ever to use read-only memory, or as you may know, ROM, cartridges. Okay, this is good. Having the game data stored inside the carts instead of the system is good. Right? In fact, these new types of cartridges are what distinguish this new generation from the old. 27 cartridges were officially released in the States for this thing, and it looked like this. This is what I'm talking about. Not only does it have labels on the ends of the carts, but has a consistent and bright design with vibrant colors on the front label. Sure, not all of them are lookers, but it is a severe improvement over the Magnavox Odyssey nonetheless. 1 year later in the States, in 1977, 78 in Europe, and 83 in Japan, the Atari 2600 released, one of the most iconic consoles ever made. And with it comes some fairly stylish cartridges, having a consistent size, appealing front and end labels, and a Dig Dug cartridge. Just what I need to feel better. However, Atari isn't finished yet. They just had to release a second console this generation, being the Atari 5200 in 1982. Its cartridges are very similar to the 2600s, only the size is a little smaller now. But I know what you're thinking. Does it have Dig Dug? Oh, thank God. Next up, we have the sequel nobody asked for, the Magnavox Odyssey 2 in 1978. Being a Mario fan and having a condition where I can't read the first word of any phrase, this makes me go insane every time I read it. I'm not a big fan of these cartridges. The names of the games are in small text above a large piece of artwork, and while the artwork changes for every game, I can't explain it, but it just feels too similar to every other cartridge. Oh, and they have a handle too, just in case. I also just put butter on my hands. Everybody on 3. 1, 2, 3. The ColecoVision was released in 1982 and launched with Donkey Kong. Okay. Its cartridges have a weird little groove on both sides. Overall, they aren't very interesting or have something that makes them stand out, but they get the job done. And that about wraps up the second generation of consoles. Now onto the third. Before we get into the big hitters, let's quickly mention Atari's output this generation. In 1986 and 1987, respectively, the Atari 7800 and Atari XEGS released. Not much to mention about the 7800 cards, as they are predictably very similar to Atari's prior systems, but the Atari XEGS is a little different with a larger gray shell and a new pattern on the sides. Yes, it has Dig Dug. Okay, let's go to the Sega side of things this generation. In 1986, Sega released the Master System. But did you really think it was that simple? The Master System has 2 different variations depending on the region. In America and Europe, it was known as the Master System, but in Japan, it was the Sega Mark III. And with these differences in consoles, comes different cartridges and oh my god, what is that? These are Master System cards, and compared to the Mark IIIs, yeesh. Well, the Mark IIIs have more oomph in their look with a label. The Master System cartridges looks like they robbed my house. Really? No artwork at all? This is pretty lame, all things considered. It just further convinces me that these next cartridges are some of the best looking ones of all time. In 1983, Nintendo finally released the Famicom, exclusively in Japan. This is another regional difference because everywhere else in the world got one of the most beloved consoles ever created, the Nintendo Entertainment System. However, the NES released in 1985, 2 years after the Famicom, so why would this be? Well, the States were suffering from the video game crash of 1983, and video games were considered a fad at that point. So Nintendo was able to carefully navigate through this problem and market the NES as a toy instead of a video game system. In fact, that's why Rob exists, to further push the point across that the NES is a toy.
Allegedly.
Its design was tweaked for the Western world as well, being more in line with a VCR, inserting the cartridge into the front slot. And speaking of cartridges, they are a lot different than the Famicoms. Compared to the Famicom's shorter, more compact cards, the NES cards are huge, which is even stranger due to the actual size of the stuff inside. This is like a third of the cartridge. But the reason for this was not only to fit with the VCR-like aesthetic, but to just have bigger things on the shelf when people were buying stuff. And with that generation done, now I want to focus more on every main company's competing consoles rather than every console that released in that specific generation. So, it's time for the This generation is home to one of the most iconic rivalries in gaming, Nintendo versus Sega. Also introducing some handhelds, there's a lot to talk about here. Starting with the Sega Genesis, released in 1989 over here in the States. These cartridges are pleasing to the eyes, a slick black shade with a very prominent label on the front, and, somewhat surprisingly, end labels. End labels are great for the shelf, especially since the boxes were usually thrown away due to being cardboard, but here, the Genesis's boxes were made of plastic, so now instead of being a necessity, it's just a nice addition. Also, it's important to note the Genesis's add-on in 1992, the Sega CD. It wasn't super successful, but this is the first we're seeing use of CD-ROMs to play games.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to Catch That Phrase! The only game show. I shot the others. Let's meet our contestants! Well, let's play Catch That Phrase! I disregard the Famicom disk system from ever happening.
The Super Nintendo Entertainment System also released around that time, in 1991. It's like the NES for the regional things again, but the other cartridges are very similar to Japan's and Europe's, so I won't mention them. The SNES has some beautiful cartridges, and the way you insert them compared to the NES is just so much better to me. You get to see the nice art of the front, they're way more compact as well, but also have some weird inconsistencies with sizes. Comparing these two cartridges, you'll likely notice the differences in the bottom part of it. This is just a simple way to store more data in the cartridge and isn't too big of a deal, especially on the shelf. Now, the end labels on SNES games are still necessities due to the SNES's cardboard boxes, but I feel they aren't amazing here. The small, thinnish font just makes the labels hard to read from far away, but it could be worse. On the handheld side of things, Nintendo and Sega both have them, with the Game Boy releasing in 1989 and the Sega Game Gear releasing in 1991. The Game Boy's cartridges are pretty much just bricks, and the Game Gear ones have a weird curve at the top. A problem I have with these is just the cartridges are so small and can't easily be displayed on a shelf, so it's hard to know and find all the handheld games you own. This is fixed later with plastic cases, but as of now, the boxes are still cardboard, so they aren't as easy to obtain. To be fair, this is more a complaint about the boxes, because of course handheld cards are going to be small, but still. But now, During this generation, Sega released two notable things. First and foremost, the Sega 32X. This was another add-on to the Genesis that still used cartridges and released in 1994, just as a way to hold people over with 32-bit games until they would go on to release their own 32-bit system, the Sega Saturn, in 1995. Its cartridges look like this, and man, I like these.
But don't tell the fans!
They have a curve at the top and a lack of end label. Afterwards, Sega released the Sega Saturn, and folks, we have something revolutionary on our hands. The first mainline console to use CDs. The benefits of CDs are extraordinary compared to cartridges, and the boosted amount of storage is incredible. What did Sega do with this? Also in 1995, Sony released the PlayStation, truly a remarkable system that Gaudia for more. The creation story of this thing is just so funny to me. Sony was trying to help Nintendo with a CD add-on to the SNES, but the attempt failed and Nintendo themselves created one of their biggest enemies.
It's funny, right guys?
Anyways, in regards to the cartridge... Oh, Sony has CDs for this one. Yeah, CDs are going to be a big trend going forwards. And due to the usage of them here, third parties were actually able to flourish on the PlayStation of all things. Well, mainly because it was actually good. Yeah, there's a reason this thing sold over 100 million copies, but where's Nintendo in all of this? Well, in 1996, Nintendo released the Nintendo 64, alongside Mario 64, to critical acclaim. Now let's just pull a CD out of my N64 storage box and... Seriously? A cartridge? In 1996? No wonder the N64 didn't even sell a third as much as the PlayStation did. What kind of a third-party developer would want to make a game for a console with a significantly less amount of storage space? Well, let's just put it on the shelf. Oh, come on! No end labels? None? I guess the SNES's cardboard boxes really foreshadowed Nintendo's stubbornness when it came down to making the type of game containers, because they still have cardboard boxes. Come on! The Virtual Blast squares. The Siege Den is pretty tame in terms of new stuff. Sure, the PS2, Dreamcast, and Xbox are released, but they all use CDs at this point, so what was Nintendo up to? Well, we have good news. Not only do they have plastic cases, they do have CDs. Thank God. Oh, come on, dude, what is this? It's obvious the only reason the N64 had cartridges was because Nintendo was scared of piracy, but still, come on man, it's 2001, and you're still not using normal CDs. This created the same problem as Nintendo's last console, as smaller CDs prevented the large amount of storage that other consoles could hold at the time. And even though this time it isn't one of the biggest reasons for the console's downfall, it still didn't help at all. However, this quickly brings us to the... At this point, Nintendo had finally learned their lesson and included regular CDs in their new console, the Wii. But now, everyone was just using discs at this point, no fun new cartridge designs to really look at. And while the Switch uses cartridges, it obviously makes sense due to its portability aspect. But overall, not much development happened after the 7th generation, which brings us to now. Sure, I'll miss the wacky cartridges and fun little quirks of the N64, but using CDs is obviously the practical choice now. I mean, even the things that still use cartridges, they're optimized as to where they work and still offer a good technological experience. That's just the way the world works now. Everything's small and convenient, and while it may not be as fun, it allows for the actual innovation in their consoles and games alongside them to flourish. Yes, the wacky-shaped era of cartridges is over, but that still isn't an excuse that restaurants mistaken my order. Where is the dig dog?